Okay, thank you, Jenny. I'll just get myself organized. Oops, there we go. Okay, can you see this all right?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, excellent, good. Okay, well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining in the follow-up to the session that Jenny and I did. That'll be just over 4 weeks ago now, 5 weeks ago, when we focused in on planting some climbing edibles. Now, for those of you who have joined my sessions before, you'll know that I'm no vegetable gardener, but I like gardening and I dabble in growing vegetables, and I'm having quite good fun with this little collection that we've got on the go at the moment. So here we go. I'll bring you up to speed with what's been happening. So the broad beans, the first picture on the left here, picture number 1, the broad beans were planted on the 27th of April. They were young plants that were potted into this pot. And then the middle picture is the broad beans 3 weeks later. Now, I don't know what your weather was like back during the early middle stages of May, but that was our Scottish summer. The weather was warm, there was very little rainfall, so watering was a big thing for greenhouse growers and anybody that planted up young plants outdoors into baskets and whatnot. So the plants, these broad beans, grew like billy-o, so they did. They took on a lot of water, which is fine. And that's just the one thing that we've got to remember when we're looking after plants in containers. Watering is so, so important. Now, the weather has really changed in the last 3 weeks, in the last 2 weeks in particular. We've kind of fast forwarded into autumn, I think, here. The temperatures have dropped quite a wee bit. It has been very windy. We've not had huge amounts of what we've had with rain there's been deluges of rain, and then it dries up and it's so windy that the containers are all drying out really, really quickly. So although there's lots of rainfall, you've still got to be mindful of your containers that might need watering, because the foliage is now growing up and creating a sort of canopy umbrella effect, and any rainfall is landing on the leaves and cascading down and an effect off the sides of the pot and not into the compost. So my broad beans got off to an absolutely fantastic start. Flowers were developing really, really quickly, and the stems were growing upright. And you can maybe see the twigs of the little branchy twigs that I used and string to make a cane to support the broad beans as they grew up. And you can see them here at the height of the top string of my cage. So once the stems, the left-hand picture here, once the stems grew around 10 centimetres taller than my support cage, I nipped out the growing tip of each plant. And this is me doing one of the tips here, just the top, kind of like 4 or 5 centimetres. Nipped it out. This does 2 things. This encourages the plant to concentrate its energy on developing flowers and the bean pods. But nipping out the softer top growth is also known to make the plant less attractive to the black fly aphid that can seriously weaken broad bean plants, as they congregate as more than a family, like an entire community of them can congregate and feast on the stems and developing pods. Aphids in general, green fly, white fly, these black flies, are the bane of many vegetable plants and flowers in the garden. And the best situation to solve or to manage them is to create an environment where aphid eaters are present to deal with them. Let nature sort it out. Some predators of aphids are ladybirds and the ground beetles, and earwigs will also enjoy snacking on them too. So make sure you're growing some wildflowers nearby, which would be a good way of attracting these beneficial bugs to your growing space to be the guards of your vegetables for you. If you aren't squeamish and you have the time, aphid colonies can be squashed between a finger and a thumb. Some people quite enjoy this, me not quite so much, but it's maybe something that you would enjoy. Or you can also make up a spray using washing up liquid and water all mixed up, and basically you drown them in that soapy spray. So the first image on the left-hand side here is a further 3 weeks on, and keeping the compost damp at all times, along with weekly feeding once the flowers appeared, and checking for the wee black flies. But touch wood, I've not been bothered by anything of note. So these images really show the pods swelling up nicely. Picture 2 in the middle shows them getting a wee bit fatter, and then the third one on the right hand side is the pods at the sides that I've started to harvest them at. I've already started to harvest quite a few of them. I don't let them get any bigger than about 10 centimetres because I prefer to eat them as whole pods, steamed, and this works well when the pods are smaller and much more tender than when they're a wee bit older and tougher. You've got to open up the pods and lift out the actual beans inside them that way. And of course, by picking the pods, this encourages more flower production and potentially more beans in the long run. But just remember, though, that you've got to keep up the watering and the feeding. So really pleased with my broad beans. Next up is my cucumber. So first picture on the left-hand side was when it was planted on the 1st of May. This one was planted. And then just over a week ago, the fruit started to form. And this is the mini cucumber variety. And they just grow like billy o. Mine are in the polytunnel. They're not outdoors, they are indoors. So they're getting that extra protection. But it's amazing how quickly they actually start to grow once they get settled. So yeah, first picture on the left-hand side, I've already cut off some of the first cucumbers and enjoyed them. They're getting kept moist at all times and they're getting fed once weekly. And I'm going to speak about plant food later on. I've got a second cucumber plant. I don't think I potted this one up when I did my first session, but this is a second cucumber plant, which is an all-female variety also. And I made a support for it out of tall canes and string. And you can see it's starting to wind its way around. I do go and help it. I do, if one of them starts to sprawl out, I do tuck it back in to encourage it to grow upwards and be supported by the canes. So lots of flowers and fruits developing. And I've got wee marigolds growing beside the cucumber plants, also as a wee bit of a deterrent to greenfly. And as I say, these aphids can be harmful in the same way to plants as the same way as a black fly is to broad beans. So really pleased with my cucumber as well. And I've actually brought one in this morning. I'll show you later on one of my, so that's for tea tonight. With something else, not just a cucumber. I treat myself more than a cucumber. Okay, pumpkins. I'm really, really enjoying growing my pumpkin. It's a wee bit of a challenge because I've not grown it up a frame before. I've always just let it sprawl all over the place and kind of let it do its own thing. So I guess I'm focusing a wee bit more on it because I'm now at the stage where I'm now trying to encourage it to twine its way up the frame. But this pumpkin was planted on the 27th of April, which is 7 weeks ago. Second picture was taken on the 10th of May, which was 2 weeks later. And you can see already how much the pumpkin has put on. It's such a quick growing plant. And then the third image was taken on the 10th of June, and that is effectively another 4 weeks on. So 6 weeks from picture 1 to picture 4 here. And as I said, my next task is to start tying the growing tip of the plant into the wire frame to encourage it to grow over it. So yeah, fingers crossed, and that will definitely be lots of photographs taken of that process. Ongoing care for the pumpkin is watering it well, and it's being fed fortnightly at the moment. But what I'm going to have to be aware of is when the plant does start to scramble over the trellis, it will produce a huge canopy of foliage. So any developing fruits, any developing baby pumpkins will possibly be shaded. So I'll just have to be mindful and cut off any excess leaves that might be covering these developing pumpkins so that they get as much sunlight, daylight and sunlight as possible to help them grow and in time ripen fully. So I find the pumpkin flowers themselves quite fascinating. Firstly, they're so big and blousy, and they're just such a beautiful, I don't even want to say that they're a yellow colour, because when you look at these pictures, there's every shade and tone of yellow in there, and there's a wee bit of orange, kind of limey, yellowy, greeny colour going on as well. I just love them. I think they're great. And the flowers are just quite interesting. So I've taken some photographs here, and I'm going to just speak briefly about pumpkin flowers. So pumpkins have both male and female flowers, but only the female can develop into a pumpkin fruit itself. And this first picture on the left-hand side, you'll see lots of flowers developing here. So female flowers have a small swelling that looks like a tiny bumpkin at the base of their flower, which you can just see in the middle picture here. You can see the flower kind of like enclosed over at the top, and then the swelling at the base of the flower. Male flowers don't have that. And when a female flower opens, which is the third picture we're looking at, you will see a kind of bumpy fat stigma in the central well of the open flower. This stigma produces nectar, but no pollen, and needs to be pollinated by the pollen of a male flower for it to turn that wee swelling into a proper fruit. The male flowers do not have a swelling at the base of their flower, as I said. So picture number 1 here, you can see my fingers are touching 2 different flowers, well, the bases of the flowers, and there's no swelling there. It's just a stem that goes straight into the start of the actual flower petals itself. And male flowers have a single stamen compared to the bumpy central one of the female flower. And if you can see this picture 2 here, you can see the single stamen coming out of the centre of this male flower. And pictures 3 and 4, there's a wee bee in there gathering up the nectar and pollen from the male stamen. And hopefully, I didn't hang about, I didn't watch what happened, but I'm hoping it visited one of the neighbouring female flowers to collect nectar. It's collected the pollen from the male flower, and I was hoping it was going to head over to a female flower to try and collect some nectar from inside her flower and deposit the pollen. It now probably had it wrapped all over itself, and leave it attached to the female flower stigma. Now, female flowers only open the one time, and they close over by midday. So I was out that day, and there were a couple of female flowers open, and the male flower that we've got this picture of here. So ideally, the wee bee went and landed immediately on one of my female flowers. And if it didn't, that window of opportunity for that female to be pollinated has passed, and now need to rely on other female flowers opening and being pollinated. So it's quite fascinating. First thing in the morning when I'm out there, they're not open yet because they're closed over. And I was a wee bit late going back out just before I came into this session here to see what was going on, and they'd all closed back over again. So I don't know what was happening out there today. Now, pumpkin problems. Probably the biggest concern might be a white powdery fungal residue which can build up on pumpkin leaves. And this is especially so if humidity is high due to poor air circulation. So ensure there is enough space for the individual plants to sprawl and spread about, and keep greenhouse windows open or polytunnel doors open as much as you can. Or if they're outdoors, it shouldn't be quite such a problem. Spores of the disease can lie dormant in old foliage that's maybe in the greenhouse or the polytunnel if it's not been tidied up properly. And they can lie in soil and compost and be scattered by water spray. So always water directly onto the compost, avoiding spray onto the leaves as much as possible. So you'll see here, this is the watering can, and it doesn't have the rose head on it. It's just got the plain spout, and the spout is basically touching the compost so that the water is coming out and going straight onto the compost and isn't being sprayed over the leaves or sprayed splashing onto the compost that might spray and bounce back up onto the leaves. But if you do find any of this white fungal disease on your leaves, cut it off. Cut off the leaves or the stems that you've spotted it on and dispose of it in a bin, but do not add it to your compost heap. Luckily, I've not had any problems with that, so I'm quite pleased. So next thing is my runner beans. So the runner beans were planted on the 27th of April, and the middle picture is the beans 4 weeks later. Once they start twining round about, they just go like Billy-O, and they soon climb up those canes. Picture 3 is the flowers developing. And again, plants in containers use an unbelievable amount of water. So my next job is to apply a mulch to the surface of the compost to try and hold in a little bit more moisture. And then first picture on the left-hand side, this is 6 weeks later. This was only just about 10 days ago. And the stems have now reached the top of the canes. And these canes were a good 2.5 meters tall, yep, 2.4 meters. The stems have now reached the top of the canes. So get yourself something sturdy to stand on, and nip out the growing tip to stop the stems from getting overly tangled, because they're going to just start sprawling back downwards. And also by nipping out that growing stem, you're directing the plant's energy to flower production. The second picture is this is new growth down at the bottom of the pot. So I'm just tying in new growth. And when I say tie in, I'm not actually tying it in with string. The runner beans just wrap themselves with the little tendrils really easily. So basically, I'm just kind of tucking it back in beside a cane, and it will just quickly attach itself to the cane. Runner beans don't need very much by way of care, or in my experience, that's the case. They need a sturdy support and regular watering, as I've mentioned. They're getting water, and they're getting fed once a week. And I've never really experienced any real troubleshooting issues with bugs and the like, but their tender, fresh leaves can be susceptible to the likes of slugs and snails. So if you don't want to be out there every morning to inspect for slugs and snails crawling about all over the pots to get into the compost, into the plants, or last thing at night with a torch, buy yourself some copper tape and attach it below the rim of the pot, which will deter the slugs and snails from slithering upwards and into the container and making a feast of the leaves, which in turn will weaken the plant, resulting in a poorer crop. Okay, and then the sugar snap peas. Sugar snap peas. So picture one was, these were young plants that were planted on the 20th of April. And the first picture is of them 2 weeks later. That's how much growth they put on then. They were inside the polytunnel at that point, so they were getting the benefit of protection. Then the second picture is taken 4 weeks later on round about the 30th of May. And you can see the plant is littered in tiny pods growing out of the flowers. The plant was now getting fed weekly by this stage and being kept well watered. Pictures 3 and 4. Picture 3 is the plant a further week on. That was just over maybe about 10 days ago. And the pods are starting to fill out beautifully. And the last picture is a bit of a collapsed support here. What I found was the canes weren't tall enough, despite having nipped the stems once they got to the height of the canes. The pot hasn't been robust enough to take the weight of all the sugar snap stems that have been growing. And what I did was I just lifted the entire pot over to a trellis, a wire frame, and I just tied the stems loosely onto the wire frame, and just to prevent the pot from continually falling over and snapping the stems. So I've learned that it's really difficult to keep this smaller pot size well enough watered to support the growth of so many plants in that size of pot. So next year, the sugar snaps are definitely going into a much larger pot. But despite all of that, I'm amazed at the number of pods I've already harvested and eaten. And to be perfectly honest, some don't even make it out of the garden into the kitchen. So sugar snap pods develop lower down in the stems. So harvest those ones first and work your way up. So for all plants, as I've mentioned, it's ongoing care now to ensure that no bugs or beasties get the better of them, and making sure that the plants are kept well watered at all times, avoiding any unnecessary stress on the plants. And as their energy levels are also being drained by all of this flower and fruit production that's going on, it's important to maintain a really strict and regular feeding regime. So this wee picture here shows what a plant needs. So first up, air. The plant needs air to breathe, but the plant mostly breathes in through its roots. So it's important that although we want the compost to be well watered, it must be free draining to prevent waterlogging. Therefore, always ensuring air channels are open, they're always present in the compost for the roots to breathe. Air circulation is also important, as I've already mentioned, for flowing in and around the plant stems and leaves, as this helps prevent a build-up of humidity and can alleviate problems with the likes of the powdery mildew that I spoke about earlier. Next thing a plant needs is water. As I've mentioned, I probably said the word water more times than anything else here. Water is so important to plants. Water keeps the plant stems and tissues in a healthy state in order that they can photosynthesize, which is making energy from the sun. And water is used to transport nutrients through the plant to where each specific nutrient is needed. And nutrients make up plant food. Next up is sunlight. Sunlight is required for the plant to photosynthesize and to help flowers bloom and further develop and eventually ripen. And let's be honest, who doesn't like a wee bit of sunshine on their back? I do, and I'm missing it today. Space is so important for plants. Just like ourselves, we like a little bit of space, and plants are no different. Space between plants helps with the air circulation that I've mentioned, and they need space for both their roots to develop and spread out, along the space for their stems and leaves to grow unrestricted. Having space all around allows sunlight to reach fruit and vegetables, to reach the stems and the developing flowers, fruit and vegetables also, which is important when it comes to ripening that harvest in order that the crop is sweeter and more edible. And the last one is soil. And of course, in our case, the soil is the compost inside the containers that the plants are growing in. The compost provides a foothold for the plant's roots and is the plant's receptacle for their drinking water, a bit like our water bottle that we might carry about with us. And the compost regulates how much water is available to the plants by helping with drainage of excess water, which ties in with me mentioning that we need to make sure there's always air channels in the compost or the soil. And lastly, the compost holds the nutrients. And nutrients are what make up plant food. And when the compost is damp, the plant's roots drink up the nutrients that's inside the compost, which ensures sustained and healthy growth. And fertilizer is the fancy name given to a wide range of plant food. And the plant food contains all these nutrients that I've just mentioned. And while these plant foods, these fertilizers, give plants the additional energy that may be needed for them to produce a hearty crop of flowers, fruit or vegetables, each type of plant food can be made up of different quantities of the main nutrients that plants require. The main nutrients that plants require as food inside that are found in the fertilizers are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Each plant food has a different mix of these three main ingredients inside it. Some fertilizers will have more nitrogen than some others, and this particular fertilizer would gear itself towards supporting green leafy growth, which would be good for leafy green vegetables such as cabbages, lettuces, and the likes, and grass if you're into lawn maintenance. Others will have higher percentages of phosphorus to support strong root growth, such as fertilizers for shrubs and trees. And another type of fertilizer, which would be higher in potassium, will be geared towards supporting the healthy development and growth of fruit and flowers. The type of fertilizer that is generally good for my climbing vegetables that we're looking at here today is one that is high in potassium, the nutrient that supports fruit and flower making. Now, these fertilizers are quite often labelled as tomato food, but they do the job perfectly well for our runner beans, cucumbers, and pumpkins just the same. There are always lots of care instructions and guidance on the packaging, so please do read it carefully and adhere to the health and safety instructions in particular. So, the one that I have been using for my plants that I've been speaking about is a liquid fertilizer, which means it is mixed with water. So the instructions in the back of the tub say how many capfuls to so many litres, which is measured into your watering can. So it's mixed up with so much water and then fed directly to the plant via watering onto the compost. The plant in turn then drinks up the food from the compost. There is really clear guidance about what the ratio should be of liquid food to water, and don't be tempted to give any extra food because the plant will not put on extra flowers or produce any more runner beans. It will put on extra soft leafy growth instead, which in turn just creates problems for you because it creates more shade for the ripening pods and fruits. Therefore, they're not getting the same chance to see the sunlight to ripen. And the extra soft leafy growth is much more susceptible to aphid attack powdery mildew and the likes. So just stick to the instructions and you will be well rewarded. And the last thing I want to show you, for those that were with us the last time, will remember that I planted up my nasturtium tree, my climbing edible flower. So this wee plant, this tub of flowers is literally living on neglect. Nasturtiums really do thrive well on not a lot. So they've never been fed, it's barely been watered, and you can see that it is now starting to sprawl up through the branches of the big branch that I stuck into the pot. And the second picture shows the nasturtium twining its stems around the twiggy branches to support it to grow upwards. And there's a few flowers now appearing. So that looks like my salad is going to look and taste a lot more colourful this weekend when I'm kidding myself when I'm being healthy and having salad. There'll be chips with it. And that brings me to the end of this wee presentation. So we're going to follow up again and see how my harvest actually comes along for my runner beans, my cucumbers, and of course the pumpkin. How will that work out? You'll have to tune in on Thursday the 18th of July at 2 p.m. to find out. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thanks, Joan. Wow, so much information there. Loads and loads of things to think about and do. I'm in awe of your runner beans because mine have been completely munched
Oh
by
no.
slugs.
Oh.
Twice we've had them out twice. They're not in a pot, they're in the garden, but they just keep disappearing. I mean, it's not completely nuts. And then the cold weather hasn't helped the growth either. So it's just been a disaster. So we'd love to hear about other people's disasters or their absolute or their joy in what they've been growing. So please unmute and join in the conversation and tell us how you're getting on. Someone's on an old computer I see here on the chat, and they don't have a mic or a camera, but she can hear us, so that's great. It was great information, she said. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think that was Heather. Oh, it was Sally. Sorry, Sally. She can hear us, but we can't see her. That's all right, Sally. You might have to put your any questions into the chat for us there. Oh.
Is it okay to ask a question about the cucumbers?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm Shelley. I'm in Doncaster, and it's been a really cucumbers. I've got them in the polytunnel, but it's been really slow season because it's been really cold, and they're just about getting going, but it's been very slow. But the first time I grow them a few years ago, I read somewhere to take off any of the little up to about sort of 6 inches. Did you do that with yours? You take off any ones that appear for about 6 inches, and then you can just let them go, if you know what I mean.
2 years ago, 3 years ago, let's get this right. 3 years ago, I did that and it all worked well. 2 years ago, I didn't do it and it seemed to be okay. Last year, I couldn't grow a cucumber for love nor money. I grew no cucumbers. They all died on me. So that didn't happen. And this year, I've not started to pick any. I'm actually harvesting them from the bottom.
Right, okay.
This was another one that I picked this morning. And these are mini cucumbers. The other plan is I only ever grow mini cucumbers, but I'm growing another variety whose name I've just forgotten, but I've brought a label in. Pachandra. Yeah, Pachandra. And there's no fruits developed yet that low down. What I've noticed is the flowers are a wee bit further up.
Right.
So
yeah.
I wasn't going to pick them off, but now I'm maybe thinking maybe I should. I don't know.
No,
I'll let you know what I do.
Yeah. We've got Perfection and Burt Plus Tasty Green and Ladiva. So they're sort of bigger than mini cucumbers, but not like the really long ones. They're kind of in between ones. Yeah. So maybe I'll leave some and take others off and just kind of experiment. Because there's about 10 or 12 plants, so we can do a mixture. Yeah.
I think that's a good way, because then it kind of covers all eventualities. And as Jenny said at the beginning, gardening isn't, what was it? It's an experiment. I forget what the
Yes,
saying
yes.
was.
There's no gardening mistakes. It's all an experiment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.